Turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 19. We're going to look at a character, a person in the Bible that had an interaction with Jesus. We all know this guy very, very well. We sang about him when we were kids in Sunday school, about a wee little man, and a wee little man was he, and how he climbed up in a sycamore tree because he wanted to see the Lord. And he got an invitation that day. And so we're going to look at Zacchaeus today. Typically in our Bible study at 10 o'clock, I always have Gord read, but we had a different psalm to read today, so he didn't get to read. So I'm going to have him read from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, the story of Zacchaeus. And so if Gord, you could read that now.
Reading of Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter. He had gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now, I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost.
All right, thank you. Let's go through the passage together, and I'm going to start in verse 1. It says here that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Let's get some geography right here. I know some of you guys like geography, so on and so forth. I shared a map a few weeks ago of the region of Jesus and so on and so forth. So let's get some bearing. The city of Jericho is a very interesting city. Historically, it's believed to be one of the oldest cities that was ever inaugurated in the world. There was a famous archaeologist in the early 1930s, going into the 40s, a name by John Gerhardt, that actually was able to do some excavation of of Jericho itself. And in that excavation, he found 4 different civilizations. One that dated back all the way to about 3000 BC. And on the next layer, there was another section, and it was a city that was fortified with huge walls that had all imploded in on themselves, and they were all burnt. We get that from about 14 BC, and that's from Joshua chapter 6, where Joshua came in before they went into the promised land, and they captured Jericho. It was the first big city that they had to capture in order to go into the land. And it was the instruction by Joshua was, I want you to go in. After all the walls implode on themselves, we're going to blow our trumpets. We're going to do all these things. We're going to scream and yell, and we were not going to have to do anything. It's just going to happen. And then we're going to burn the city. And that's what happened. And then there's 2 other different cities that were built on that after the ruins were all covered and so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting city. Here's a neat, or not a geographical thought. It's also the lowest city in the world. It has an elevation of 846 feet below sea level. Kind of cool. It's about 15 miles northwest of Jerusalem, just above the Sea of Galilee. And it says here that Jesus was going through. So now we know where we're at. It's neat history and neat little tidbits about this town of Jericho. It is still a town that thrives today. It has about a population of about 20,000 people. Lots of neat buildings have been constructed there by U.S. and so on and so forth. And it is now presently dominated by the Palestinians, and we know what's going on there right now with the fight over land. So this is one of the plots of land that is just west of the Jordan, north of Sea of Galilee, kitty corner to Jerusalem. So give you an idea there. So here Jesus, it says that he's walking through this town, and a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. And we get two things that it says about this man Zacchaeus. It says, number one, he was a tax collector. Not only was he a tax collector, but he was a chief tax collector. And not only was he a tax collector, he is also wealthy. How do you like the tax man today? He was a chief tax collector. He's a bad man. Yeah, okay. Corey got it right on the head. He's a bad man. You know, we don't like the tax man. We like it when he gives us our rebates. He likes it when he, gives us a break, so on and so forth. But overall, if you looked, at the end of your working life and you look at all the money that you paid into taxes, you wouldn't be very happy because you're asking yourself, what did I get for this? Well, the way it worked, Rome was in charge of all of the nations around. And what they would do is they would impose a tax. And they would hire people to be their tax collectors. And then out of those tax collectors, they would have what they would call chief tax collectors, guys who would have a bunch of little tax collectors under them doing their minion work. And they would go out and they do their stuff and they collect the money from all these different people. And the requirement was that Rome would set the amount, and they could collect anything above that amount that they wanted to extract from people. And therefore, we understand why we don't like taxmen. Because they had the ability and the power to take whatever they wanted from the people. And it says here that he was a chief tax collector. So that means he wasn't liked very much. We'll see later on in verse 7 what they called him. But here, they didn't like him. Rightly so. Nobody likes to be pilfered. Nobody likes to be cheated. Nobody likes to, be taken advantage of. And nobody wants to see somebody else getting wealthy on your dime. And that's exactly what Zacchaeus was. He wasn't liked, and he had a job that nobody liked him having. So a little bit more history of what he was like. A tax collector, a chief one. But there's something interesting about him. If you look in verse 3, he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Judy walked in this morning. She said, all I see are shoulders. And I said, well, you're going to totally be able to relate to who I'm talking to this morning. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. So Judy, you can appreciate this. But, it's interesting if you look at Zacchaeus. He wanted to see Jesus, but there was a problem. He had a limitation. He was short. So, he's there in the crowd, and because he can't see him, did he use it as an excuse? And I have to ask ourselves, do we, if we have the opportunity to see Jesus, what are the things that keep us from wanting to see him? Or what are the things, not from wanting to see him, but from saying, well, you know what, because of that, because I have this ailment, because I have this situation, because I have this past, because of the people that I live with, because of whatever, I'm not going to be able to see Jesus, and I'm therefore going to use it as an excuse. And Zacchaeus very easily could have just thrown in the towel and say, you know what, I can't see over the crowd. Maybe I'll come back another day. But he really, really wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to find, and I don't know what it was about Jesus he wanted to find about. Maybe it was right before when Jesus was walking into Jericho that he heals this blind man. And maybe he heard about it, or maybe he heard about the different people that he'd healed along the way before that. And maybe the stories that Jesus had told people and the parables that he'd shared with people. Luke spends a lot of time sharing those stories and those parables of when he was spending time. And maybe Zacchaeus had heard about this teacher and he was enthralled and he was just like, well, I want to do something about this. I want to find out about this Jesus. He sounds like a really cool guy. He sounds like somebody that, maybe can help me in my situation. I don't have a lot of friends. I could use Jesus as my friend. And maybe that's what he was thinking. But he didn't give in to his excuses, even though he was short. And I say, well, what are the excuses that we have today? I think one of the biggest excuses why we don't see the whole story is we get so busy in our everyday lives that we forget about what it is to want to see Jesus. We can come up with our priorities. Well, I've got other things that are more important for me to see Jesus. And, maybe he was going to have a meeting that day with all his other tax collectors, and maybe he was expecting them to come and, hand in their money, so on and so forth. Maybe. But this was a priority to him. And he didn't put up with any of the excuses. He even had a problem because he didn't have a way of seeing him, and he has to figure out what he's going to do. If you look at verse 4, it says, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. It's amazing what people will do when they really want something to happen. We'll invest all kinds of time, energy, and thought into, okay, well, this is what I want to do, and I've got some obstacles here, but I'm going to figure out what I'm going to be able to do in order to get that. And Zacchaeus was the exact same way here. Even though he had some obstacles, he's like, okay, I really want to see this Jesus, so I'm going to figure it out. And it's interesting, it says that he ran ahead and he climbed a tree. Number one, it was very undignified for somebody who was rich to get in a hurry and rush himself and run ahead. And secondly, to climb a tree, he's like a little kid. We almost see him here as a reporter. He's turned into the reporter, not the person that would come and be the spotlight. He wasn't seeking that. He wasn't, okay, I want to meet Jesus and I want everybody to see that I'm meeting Jesus. No, he humbled himself and he ran and he finds a tree and he climbs up it like a little kid. It's interesting. Jesus says that if we want to enter into the kingdom, we need to become like little children. Zacchaeus became like a little child that day. And he climbs up a tree and he sees Jesus. Interesting. Here, this wealthy man who has the world by the tail becomes undignified and humbles himself. Verse 5. It says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. It's interesting, and we look at this in John chapter 2, that Jesus knows the hearts of all people before he talked to them. But Jesus is walking along and he sees this guy up in a tree and he doesn't, hey, you up there. Yeah, come down here. He called him by name. When was the last time do you think that Zacchaeus heard his name said in a nice way? Oh, there's Zacchaeus. Better split because he's just going to come to get money from us. Maybe one of the only times that he'd ever heard his name said nicely was from his mother, maybe his father. But all the people in the city looked at him, but here Jesus, Zacchaeus. I wonder what that sounded like to him. Jesus wasn't rebuking him for taking money or anything like that. He's just said, you know what, Zacchaeus, come down. Come down to my level. I want to go to your place. I want to have a meal with you. I want to get our feet under the same table. I want us to sit around the same table. I want to share some food together. I want to have some fellowship with you. I want to get to know you. See, that's what Jesus is like. It says that in John chapter 10, verse 3, it says, the gatekeeper will be there to open the gate. And as the gate is open, the sheep will come in, and he will know each of his sheep by name. You know, just as Jesus knew Zacchaeus' name, he knows all of our names. And he wants to invite us in to have dinner with him, have a relationship with him. That's what he's doing. And here Zacchaeus, he gets the invitation, and then in verse 6, so he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. I think it's important to recognize that Zacchaeus didn't hesitate. Oh, well, I haven't phoned ahead to let my wife know that I'm bringing company over. You know, maybe it's not a good day for you to come, Jesus. Or, you know, Jesus, I just wanted to see you. I wanted to see who you are. I'm really, really busy today, but I was able to fit you into my schedule. I've got things that I got to do. Maybe could we schedule next week when I'm not as busy? At once, he dropped everything and he welcomed Jesus. And how did he welcome? Joyfully. He was happy. He was happy to have a relationship and see Jesus and be able to invite him in. That's a good picture, I think, for us to be able to see how he looked at Jesus and how he was able to just welcome him. He comes to Jesus at once because he wanted to see Jesus. And he was open to spending time with Jesus. And he welcomes him with great joy. And it's interesting that Zacchaeus, when he welcomed him, and I think this is an important point for us to see, when he received him, he received Jesus. He invited Jesus into his house. He didn't invite a creed or a doctrine, not a ceremony, or he didn't invite him into a ceremony. He invited Jesus into his life. Wow. I want you to come to my house. Yes, I'll take the invitation, Jesus. Well, then we have another group of people, and that's kind of where we fit in. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. I don't know if you've ever judged somebody when they come to church, or judged somebody, well, do you think they'd really? I'm sure you haven't. Yeah, right. We do very well at being self-righteous some of the time. We do very well at judging people. Well, you know, in order for you to become part of the church, you know, you gotta, no. Where do we get these rules and ideas from? Well, it's our traditions, it's our creeds, it's our doctrines, it's our ceremonies that we have. But we just talked about that Zacchaeus didn't come to Jesus to be involved with all these creeds and ceremonies and all that. He came to just spend time with Jesus. If we could just invite people to spend time with Jesus, and when they come and he knows their name. See, I think some of the time we look at people and it's like, yeah, they might be sinners. But where were we when we came to Jesus? Were we any different? Every single one of us needs the mercy and love and grace of Jesus. And here these guys were like, well, if they only knew, Jesus, if you only really knew who this guy was, he's a bad guy and he's going to talk about it at the very end of why he did. But we can get so self-righteous and so religious and so caught up in, okay, well, this person needs to do this, this, and this, and please jump through this hoop, and please tick off this box, and do this and do that, and then therefore, maybe you could become like us. Really? It doesn't work that way. We've made it work that way, but here we can get to the point that we're just very focused on the wrong things. Not focused on what Jesus is focused on all the time. We judge, we condemn, we control, and we can be self-righteous some of the time. Just like these guys. And we can say, oh, well, that's terrible. You need to read the rest. Yeah, we do need to read the rest of the story. In verse 8. But Zacchaeus, and maybe he heard that. There's the but there. Maybe he heard what he was being accused of. I'm sure he heard it all the time. Oh, that's Zacchaeus. He's the guy that's going to rip you off. He's the guy that's going to take taxes. He lived in that world all the time. But it says, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. You see what happened? Zacchaeus, because he was confronted with a man that knew his name and was willing to come to his house and have a meal, even with all the other people accusing him of being a terrible person. You realize what happened to him? He was transformed that day. His life was changed because he came in contact with Jesus. And it caused him to do something. He took what was his most precious thing in his life, money. And he said, here and now, Lord. First, he calls him Lord, which is huge. Because it's him recognizing the lordship of Jesus, the lordship of him as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and recognizing how great he was. He says, Lord, today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take half of what I have and I'm going to give it to the poor. I bet you this really ticked off all the religious leaders, because how many times had they knocked on Zacchaeus' door? Yeah, we're here to collect money for the poor. Go away, I'm too busy. And they'd ask over and over and over, because that's what their job was, to take care of the poor and the needy. But here he has a transformation of heart because he came in contact with Jesus. He says, you know what? Half of what I have, I'm going to give to the poor. And I find this a little bit comical. If I cheated anybody, there's no question of, of course he cheated people. That was his job. But he says, if I've cheated anybody, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay it back 4 times the amount. That shows how rich he was. That shows how much money this guy had. He's giving half of what he has to the poor, and then he's giving 4 times if anybody that he's cheated. That's a lot of money, and I don't know what the amount is, so Gord, don't ask. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but I'm sure it was a lot of money. But there's a transformation. And I think that if we understood what it is to be in the presence of Jesus, to understand what he has done for us, to understand the amount of love that he has for us, to understand the sacrifice he had for us, would that not transform us? I think the reason why a lot of us come up with the excuses that I talked about earlier was because we don't really want to think of transformation as much as we want to think of addition. See, what I mean by that is Zacchaeus just didn't add Jesus into his life. He let Jesus change his life and transform him. In Romans chapter 12, Paul says this, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. What does it mean to conform to the pattern of this world? It means to become like the world is. And if we were to talk about what the world's like right now, it's selfish. It has a sense of entitlement. It's bickering, it's arguing, it's fighting. The world that we live in is not that great, but he says, do not conform yourselves to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. Zacchaeus was transformed this day. He just didn't add Jesus onto, well, okay, that'd be another good thing for me to have. Jesus got some good teachings, and I know it. And I think that's what some of the time we do. We just add him on and we don't let him transform us. He said, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And transformation doesn't happen just once. Transformation is a constant thing that we need to continually be transforming and thinking like Christ. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Lord, here and now. Not next week, not when it's convenient, but Lord, here and now, I'm going to give half. I'm going to repay. And then Jesus finally speaks up. Says, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. I would imagine that some of the Jews of the day would have a hard time calling Zacchaeus a brother. But he said, today, this guy too is also your brother. Oh, he may have had a sordid past, but he is your brother because he has changed and he has followed. I think it comes down to us when we see Jesus. We can look at verse 7 and we can talk about how we need to be, not so self-righteous and not condemned and so forth. But I think it's looking at how much impact Jesus had on Zacchaeus, of whether we're allowing him to have the same impact in our life on a daily basis. See, he was willingly and joyfully wanting to accept Jesus. I want you to come to my place. Jesus actually gave the invitation, and he gives the invitation to all of us. And we could come up with our excuses. Oh, I'm too short. Oh, I'm too busy. My family. I've got too much going on right now. But not now. Zacchaeus dropped everything. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to accept Jesus every day in our life? Not creeds, not doctrines, not some theory, not even some special ceremonies. Are we just willing to accept Jesus for who he is? You know, Zacchaeus is really a model of what it is to accept Jesus. Here's why. Zacchaeus received Jesus by seeking after him with some real effort. He put some effort into it. He also received Jesus by humbling himself, by doing things that were undignified as a man of his stature. He's also a model of following Jesus because no matter how sinful or hated he was, he didn't let that affect him in going to Jesus. Another model is that when he heard his name, Zacchaeus, and he was invited by him, he went without delay. Not reschedule, without delay. He also received Jesus by coming down to him, coming down to his level. He could have said, no, I'm fine up in the tree here. I've got a good view of you. I got to see what I wanted to see. But he came down and he humbled himself. And I think one of the biggest things is that he received Jesus himself, just Jesus. He received him into his life. He received him into his home. And he received him joyfully, excitedly. He received him despite what others said about him. But he also received him, and the way he proved that was by his repentance and also his transformation in his life. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, physically, but he was a big man. When you look at how he sought after Jesus and how even Jesus sought after him and calls him out and says, Zacchaeus, I want to spend some time with you. No excuses, without delay. You know, it's the same thing for you and I. Jesus says, I want to have a relationship with you. Not next week. Not when it's convenient. I want to have a relationship with you now. Zacchaeus, as I say, is a great model for us. Just becoming humble, of just allowing him to come into our lives. And I believe that's not just a one-time thing. We have to do it over and over, of inviting him in and letting him transform us into who he wants us to become. And not conforming to the world that we live in, which is so easy to do, but to have our minds changed so we can find out what God's perfect and pleasing will is for our life. Some lessons from a little man that we sang about in Sunday school. A guy that was earnest, who wasn't liked, but became loved, by Jesus. And a great model for us.